thank you for having us. These ladies and gentlemen know where all the bodies are buried in Canberra, so I'm going to try and be a detective and draw that out of them over the next half an hour. Thank you for joining us. It seems a good timing as well as we head into an election season. I think we should start with your reflections, and Yaron, we'll start with you about how both the opposition and the government is going at the moment, and both kind of internally how it's all working and of course in the eyes of the public.
Okay. I think it's pretty straightforward. The government would probably want to have been in a better place as it goes into the, last few months before an election. So it's a challenge. It's the first term. Things probably should have been better. There are some tough conditions out there. The opposition also shouldn't have been in as strong a position as it is. So I guess we're seeing something quite interesting. So for those that follow politics, know anyone in this room that would, it makes for an interesting contest. But there's a long time to go. I think if there's one thing I would point out is that things change. And even though they seem tight now, there's a long way to go. That's my simplistic observation.
Eamonn, would you agree with that?
Well, do I agree with you? Not entirely. I actually, you would expect me to have a slightly different take on it. Things have been pretty tough, I think, for everybody. That is felt everywhere, whether you're in government, you're in banking, every single sector feels it, right? Where you have any interaction with people in the community. So government performance is sort of seen through that. I think, look, they have done some big things, but in politics, as we all know, you've got to shout it from the rooftops, and the second you don't talk about it, no one remembers. They only remember the things you didn't get right or you didn't do. So I can talk about all those things on that last term if you want.
No, it's
but I still don't think there's a mood for change. My own gut feeling is telling me that you're like on a bit of a two-term strategy at the moment, but it's just me. I think they have significant problems in terms of the Teal seats. I think that's big. And it's a pretty big mountain to climb. I mean, you've got to get, 21 seats or something in order for a majority. That's a lot when you've got a structural issue with Teals, I think. Having said that, Labor's not out of the woods, and there's a two-seat majority. So you can never, in this business, you can never take anything for granted. Dutton's very effective, just as I think Anthony Albanese is very effective. So, they're two very experienced guys, right? They've been in that joint a long time. So and I think that's what we're starting to see. These guys who are experienced really starting to test the waters now as we get into that final straight about what the issues are that will resonate the most. So you see the messaging around cost of living, and now they're starting to branch out and they're starting to sort of lay the groundwork for future. You've got to have a future vision. The guy talking at last night's dinner, and wasn't he fantastic? It's all about the future. And you guys are all about the future. Government and politics is all about the future. And you're starting to see that, whether it's nuclear or whether it's transition, that's going to be a big part of it. And it's so closely tied to the cost of living and the pain of what you're paying for things every single day.
Dee, what's cutting through at the moment?
Well, I think that is actually the tricky thing with social media and the algorithms on it. It's hard to make anything cut through. In the old days, with broadcast media, if you stuck to your messages, people just saw it, whether they wanted to or not, kind of thing. But now, because we're self-selecting, I sit in focus groups, and the amount of people who, when you say, where do you get your news from, they answer Facebook is fucking terrifying. But that is part of the problem.
What's the breakdown? When you're talking about focus groups, most people are getting their news from Facebook. Is that what demographic?
Okay, so I'd have to sort of, I am talking about swinging voters because that's who, and I think people think swinging voters are people who are really thinking about who to vote for. They are absolutely the most disengaged people on earth. They could not give a shit. So they're not newsy people anyway.
Technical term.
And the other thing that these people have, and this is I think affects the banks as well, is just a massive distrust in institutions, in politics. They don't think that politics has made a difference to their lives. And I, as a good Labor person, will say, well, yes, we've got schools and hospitals and blah, blah, blah. But to them, they don't see that. And then and so that's hurting them. And it also means as well, people are kind of angrier than they used to be. And again, social media feeds that because it feeds the algorithm. So it ramps up the anger. So people are more likely to switch easier. It used to be you'd give people more of a go. Having said that, I think we're overreacting a little bit, like you see all the doom and gloom, oh, Albo's in a load of trouble. Even on the very last poll, Labor wins. I mean, and possibly with a majority still. So, sure. And as Eamonn pointed out, that the Libs writing off the teal seats, it makes their path to victory incredibly difficult. Not impossible, but difficult.
Let's talk about the decline in support or faith in institutions, because I think we're all in good company. Journalists, political operatives, banks. Sorry. How has that got worse this term? How do you see that kind of manifesting in social media, and how does it change kind of behaviour, voting or otherwise?
You could look at journalism to start with, right? So the
Please.
way, yeah, okay.
Please do.
So, but if you think about the old days, ads fund journalism largely.
Yep.
They shouldn't, but they do. And in the old days, Channel 9 News would have 30,000 people watch it. Not 30,000 people, sorry, a spot in the Channel 9 News for an ad was $30,000 because it had an audience of, you know, a couple of million people. Because that's changed, journalism is now almost forced to be clickbaity, because the more people click on the story, the more you can charge for ads that go along with that story. So that is also, I think, pushing this kind of anger, because we know that people are we're hardwired to notice bad stuff. If you go on your news site, you click on the bad shit first. Every single person does that. And that's, I think, part of it as well. It sort of feeds into it. So it becomes this sort of cycle of anger.
Yeah. Okay, so given we're here at this conference today, do you have any advice to the big banks about how they should be marketing themselves?
Yes, I do. Stop trying to be people's friends. People don't want to be friends with a bank. Mostly they don't even like you. That's okay. That's okay. But they trust you. Still, they do. They trust you. So I don't want to see another bank ad which says, oh, we're here to help you. It's like, I don't know. Oh, I think there was a Royal Commission that said a lot of times you weren't. And that's still in people's memory. So but if you ask people, do they trust that their money is safe in the bank? The answer is yes. So start there. ANZ, I think, is doing it well at the moment, bringing back the Falcon. It's a good branded thing, whereas too many other bank ads, I could swap logos and wouldn't notice any difference between them. And they're not really... it's like, you know, when you go to a new school and the first kid that comes up to you to be your friend is the loser? They're kind of desperate. That's what some of the bank's marketing feels like a little bit.
Okay.
Laura.
Okay, tell us what you really think, Dee.
Just stop holding back.
Dee's very shy.
I'm going to try and say something nice about... Yeah, I'll say something nice about the bank.
Yeah, Tories, always nice.
If I'm going to fuse both of your questions, Laura, to this notion of trust and banks, you've probably heard about the Edelman's Trust Index and nonsense like that. Trust is not absolute, it's relative. And that's kind of what you're saying, Dee. It's, you know, they've got these brands and they say, oh, that's trusted, but it's about relative trust, relative to the job I give you to do. So to your point, Dee, I want the bank to be a good bank. I don't need you to be all these other things that you sometimes think you have to be. Because what they want is an authentic attachment. They want to know, I'll give you a really good example. My real estate agent. Oh. I would trust him to sell my house because he's a bit of a shark. I will not trust him around my family. Right? Now, he doesn't hear this, does he? No, good. But the point is, for the job that I want him to do, I trust him. That's not an absolute trust, that's a relative trust. And I think that's what we're saying with banks. You've got to be authentic. Do what you are meant to do well, and you'll build that trust. They, as you say, they might not love you, but they need you. And at times they'll want you. Don't worry about love. They just want to, you just have to be accepted. And that's a really important distinction between absolute and relative trust.
Anna, any regrets of putting this panel together at this point?
Well,
let's just keep on charging on.
Well, the point I would add to that is, this is fascinating because banking is in the front line of the media war, right? Yeah. Every single day. It's news, it's retail, all those things. Very similar to government. So sometimes you get caught in the same news cycle, trying to fix things and explain complex situations in the most simple terms to people who will never be happy. The difference between you guys and politicians is that you'll always be here and they come and go. You know? And that's, but my point is, so the approach for a politician is you got to manage every day, because over time there's an impression. And if that impression is bad for you, come election time, you are gone. I think the banking approach is one that is similar, but you've got to keep the impression. You've got to be doing things that are positive and informative, not so you're going to win an election. It's because you are trying to create the environment that then leads you into the government and the policy and the media space that keeps that environment better for you, to run your businesses, to make it easier for people who are your clients. I mean, that's what you're trying to do.
The difference between politicians, Dee, and the banks is that politicians do feed the news cycle. They're putting spokespeople up every day. The banks don't do that so much.
Well,
you think
banking
that's...
scams yarn is a ripper. I mean, that's everywhere, right? I mean, that whole campaign is constant.
Yeah.
I mean, people are
So
constant.
what's your advice there then, Eamonn? Do they need more spokespeople on different things? Because we do hear from the bank's economists from time to time. We rarely hear from CEOs, but do they need to be more political, if you know what I mean?
Well, I would be cautious about it purely because I think there is a shift, as was raised last night. There's a shift now, you know, it's gone from everything's face-to-face, everything's physical, and that is starting to move away. And, you know, we are still a little bit behind. I mean, I've just come back from Indonesia. Half of that country will never have an account with a bricks and mortar institution. They will not. Wow. It's all on their phones, right? And that's growing. So I think it's the sort of, you know, you've got a great head of the association. Thanks, boss. You can pay me later. You know, but you know, you've got to be careful with spokespeople, and you've got to be clear about what you're trying to do with your bank, with your brand, because in the end, you could be doing yourself harm.
So it's more risk than reward.
It can be. It can be. You've got to be very selective.
Sorry, Dee, I interrupted you.
Back to Eamonn's point, and I think it's important for banks to understand this, but also we say it to politicians as well, and they don't like it when you say this to them. No one cares about you.
Yeah.
They care about themselves. They've always cared about themselves, and they're motivated by themselves. So with going back to, you know, when you get the last sort of 10 years, you've had these people in the industry called charlatans who come up and say, I'd like to tell your brand story in an authentic way. And YouTube's full of them. And what I say, again, to banks and politicians is the bit that's relevant is the bit that changes their life. It's not about you ever. And politicians have a tendency to talk about what they're doing instead of why and what it means for the people at the other end. And so, like, so if we're doing candidate ads in politics, like I'll never start a candidate ad with, you know, hi, I'm Anna Bly and I'm your local member for, because I say at that point everyone tunes out. And it's the same with a bank ad. You wouldn't start like that. Start with the bit that's interesting and relevant for the person you're talking to. So in political terms, it's like the people in this area are sick of whatever, and people go, yeah, I'm sick of that too. And then all of a sudden you're in there. And it's the same with any communication. Just remember, it's not about you.
Dee, on that point, we've seen this interest rate hike cycle, 12 in a row. Obviously, there's a lot of political heat in that. But when you're looking at focus groups and research in this sense, to what extent, if any, are the banks blamed?
If I told you things in focus groups like that, I would get a call from Paul Erickson in about 30 seconds firing me from the campaign.
I can tell you what's in Labor's focus
go to
groups.
someone else.
I'll tell you what's in Labor's focus group. No, but
Please.
if you're talking about housing, and perhaps that's in a way, yeah. So this is a slightly counterintuitive view. You're probably thinking, oh, we shouldn't be talking about housing because interest rates are so high if you're in the banking sector. Well, I actually think that's kind of not where the money is, no pun intended. Because you've got to sometimes find a way, to Dee's point, of connecting with people. And the corollary effect is what I call it. And if you can get people to be thinking about what if the opposite was to occur, it's a very powerful way of dealing with some of the things you have to deal with, that you make too much money, that you're too big, etc. So with housing, everyone's talking about the housing crisis and how people can't get into housing. But think of this. The people who have a house or a mortgage have done so because of you. You have facilitated that. So it's a counterintuitive way of saying, actually, housing is a great thing that you should be talking about at this point in time because it's such a huge issue. There's a way for you to fit into that relevance framing that Dee talks about because for those that have one, you did it. And that's personally relevant and powerful. So yes, it's counterintuitive. Oh my goodness, we're going to talk about housing. But that's what they're talking about. So here's a way to do it in a highly constructive way.
Yeah, and you know, on that, let's not forget, owning a home is still a massive aspiration. And what is that? People hope for that. Hope. Who used that slogan?
Yeah.
Hope is an incredibly powerful sentiment in politics. And you try to use it as much as you can, positive, because no one ever goes into an election just trying to defend their record. It's about what you're going to do in the next term.
That's right.
That is hope, that is facing forward. So...
Although swinging voters vote against things, not for things, so it's almost like...
They also do that. That's exactly right. So you've got to be knocking the other guys.
Yeah.
But no, don't get me wrong. I mean,
Yeah.
No, 100%.
You've all been in the inner sanctum, Yaron, Morrison, Eamonn, Gillard. So in the lead up to an election, and let's say, we're 6 months away, I don't know, maybe a bit longer. What happens in the PMO? Is there more access for corporate Australia? Is there more ability or more of an appetite for politicians in government or opposition to, re-engage with corporate Australia more broadly? They're looking for advice. What happens at this time in the cycle?
You can go first. That sounds like a hard question. You do it.
I think that is. I think that is a hard question because the people who do it well, and it's usually most people in government because they've been around for a while. They do consult. They consult all the time. They might not consult to the extent people want.
So you're talking inside government consulting corporate Australia. They
Correct.
do it well.
100%.
So who's doing that at the moment? Well,
I will say that they all are because what else would you expect me to say, right? But people who do it well. Usually, they put a process in place. That is what this government did. Sometimes, that can be very effective.
Is this government better than others?
I think this approach is very steady and it's very, very stable, I think. And that is a sign of Albo's time in the place. It's run very much like that. He always talks about, this is an adult cabinet. I let them do their own jobs, that sort of thing. So, they've really gone out of the way for that. But in terms of the engagement piece, if you're doing it properly, you engage throughout the whole time. You're never going to keep everyone happy, right? The difference is actually who starts turning up to your events, funnily enough. And you start to see the coffers go up and down, who's donating more, and that's one of the signs people use to work out who's going to win.
I have a slightly different answer. Not to say yours was incorrect, by the way, just so it's clear.
Thanks,
you start to look at, it's a triangle. So you're not just looking at corporate Australia in isolation. You're not just talking to them. You're starting to look, as part of that triangle, what do voters think of that sector? What are their expectations of me as the government in how I deal with them? Either that's because of regulation or new policies or whatever it might be. So that's the triangle they'd be working to as well. And that's when you get some difficult times when you're on the nose and you're easy pickings as well. Yeah. It's like, well, we could do with a little extra money. Let me look at that polling. I won't say banks because everyone's already had a go at them. That's not fair. You look at a sector and you go, well, we do need some extra money. They're on the nose. Yeah. Those social media tech giants. It will have very little political cost for us to have a go at them. So that's that triangle in play. And I'm not saying that defines policy making, but it is certainly a consideration. It's a much smarter way of thinking about it than just because you've got a good relationship or a bad relationship with an individual corporate leader. It's better to understand what are voters expecting me in how I deal with that sector.
And it's also about inoculate or actually just putting out a fire because we know in some campaigns third party organisations like, was it the retail industry against Rudd, have run massive campaigns. So a lot of times it's like, okay, who's really hating on us and who's cashed up and how can we put the fires out there so they don't...
But Yaron, Eamonn, I mean, when you're in the PMO and look, government shouldn't be making legislation that affects, big corporations or big sectors like banking without some input from the sector. They are the experts, obviously. So when there is a, big decision to be made or lobbying that's required, what's the advice to this room
lobbyist.
about?
I would get a good lobbyist.
That's a very good idea. If you know anything.
Or run a big ad campaign.
That's right. Okay, good one.
What's the advice about, politicians' time are precious. We know how busy sitting weeks are. Who does it well? How do you make the PMO listen?
Yeah, it's basically it's alignment. It's just human nature. No one is going to listen to you if you kick the door open and go,
exactly.
You mucked this up, you're causing us misery, blah, blah, blah. It's about the solution.
Charm.
Bring the solution.
That's
not a bad thing because that's actually how you shape what impacts you, you know?
Yeah.
Governments are resource poor, staffers are run off their feet, ministers are. There's not enough hours in the day. Remember that flight, we were just talking about the flight with Kevin Rudd, remember that?
Should we tell it now?
You can tell that, the length of that day.
We'll wait to the end.
So it was a very long day. But the point is, people, that is every day. And, you know, there's 100 people wanting to talk to you about any given issue at any time. So the people who get the best response are the ones who turn up and actually helpful.
Yeah, staffers are run off their feet. But, I mean, again, we're close to an election. Minority is not out of the question here. The Greens are going to play a big role no matter what in the next parliament. The Teals will as well, independents like Di Lee. So what's the value, I guess, in interacting with them and, you know, going into the next parliament? How should the corporate sector, you know, prepare for perhaps a minority government where the Teals and the Greens have more power?
Well, that's...
You like hard
That's
questions, don't you?
Yeah. Well, firstly, we'll see what happens. But I mean, any prudent corporate leader is thinking, I should be trying to talk to everyone, because you don't know where things will lie on the other side. So you're probably already doing that. Your GR people would be smart enough to say it would be prudent to speak to him, her, all of them. But it still comes down to what Eamonn was saying. What have you got to talk about? What's of relevance? And if you're just sort of creating your own insurance policy for a relationship, that's not going to endure for very long. You still have to be talking about, well, what is it that you're solving, as you said? What's relevant to their constituents? You've got to still be entirely relevant, no matter who it is. But I think anyone that tells you that they know exactly how the next election result will come through is, not with regards to the macro results, I think, you know, there's not many options there, but who will be there? We've got redistributed boundaries. We've got all sorts of interesting quirks. So it's just a case of making sure that on the other side, you're ready with a relevant set of solutions or stories about what it is that makes you relevant to their voters' lives.
So what do we think about election timing then? Because we're now looking at perhaps a rate rise in August. The probability of that happening yesterday became much more real. Some economists are saying September. I mean, does that change thinking from Albo of when he goes?
I haven't had a conversation with him about that.
I know, but just, you know, given your experience and expertise, you go when you can win.
100%. That's it. You go when you can win, number one. When you look at the rest of the year, let's not forget the Queensland election is in October.
So
you
just explain that a little bit. Why not?
Well, you can't run a campaign at the same time.
Yeah.
It becomes very difficult. You can't administer two elections. And also for the party, that's an enormous outlay of resource and people. And the major parties... You know, you look at the Teals and they can get 50 people to turn up to something. We can't get 10 kids to turn up at a business sometimes, right? So it's money and time and resource. So you do not ever want to run two campaigns side by side.
Or even back to back is hard.
Back to back,
Right.
So, but
okay, so that puts October out of the question.
100%.
And November and December.
Maybe a little window. Maybe, who knows, right?
Well,
People
but so close to Christmas, Australians don't like that,
And
do
then
they?
you've got West Australia.
Yeah.
Western Australia.
And Campbell Newman learnt the hard way of
That's what I
calling
was
in
saying.
January.
There's something else, though. We're all talking about, in this conversation, an early election. I mean, I've been in the room on two occasions, like the two elections where the PM says, when should we go? And you're right, you go when your pollster has said you can go, especially if you're going to go early.
Hang on, tell us how that conversation went and how far out from it were you starting to have those conversations?
Now, wait for the
Come on,
memorise.
Yaron.
No.
This is Chatham House.
But you know what, they happen all the time, right? Because
So-
people start...
Okay, how
It can
far
change.
before the election did Morrison actually ask you what you thought?
19 or 22.
Give us both.
Look, he'd actually, I think it's a matter of public record, he'd already said often enough that he was going full term, which...
They all say that.
But he did. So that's the thing, he actually did. And tell you what, from my perspective, it's like, why did we do that? Where's the wriggle room? We can't surprise them, you told them. But that's beside the point. The question really is, though, if you go early, voters want to know, why have you done this? If you don't have a good answer of why you're going early, you will be punished. And I remember a firm I was with was looking after the Tories, and Theresa May went early, really early, against advice. And the voters went, what's all this about? And they quite rightly said, I don't like this, and she didn't have a good reason. So even
It's
in
working
going
well
early,
for Rishi too so far.
well, that's a separate seminar altogether. But the point is, Albo would still have to answer that question if he goes too early. Why are we going early? Are we going early because there's some bad economic news coming? He's not going to say that. So you've really had to have a good narrative as to why you're doing it as well. And I don't know what that would be for going early at this point in time.
Any other
No,
thoughts?
can't do that.
Dee, nothing? No theory? Well, come on, what can you say?
No, I can
Nothing?
literally say nothing on this one.
Paul's not watching, I promise you.
No.
He's texting now. He's going
She's got a
He
phone
knows
out as
everything.
well.
Yeah. No. Look, no one knows. There's arguments to say you're better off waiting till after Queensland and West Australia. Yeah.
Eamonn, Gillard famously announced the election date.
I was in the room with that
Well
conversation.
out.
Actually, let's talk about that, right? That's very interesting.
Please.
I always think so. Because it was constant. Wherever we went, there was a sort of feel of turmoil during that time, right?
But
And
it was
people-
bad internally at that time too.
That's what I'm saying. There was an internal, it was people, so people were like, just call the election, call it, right? Everyone was saying it. Everyone from business would come in the room. And you know what her mistake was? She listened to them all. She listened to the people who were talking to her from outside government, right? Because they all wanted certainty, et cetera, et cetera. And what happened? She goes down to the press club, announces this thing thinking, ordinarily,
But
you would
how did that
interpret it as-
conversation go before announcing it really early?
Because the reason was, we need a bit of certainty around the joint. It's not just us saying that, it's people outside. Let's do the right thing. Let's tell everyone when it is coming, right? That's what people are telling us they want. That's what she would say that. And you know what happened? She goes down there, she announces it, and then people just crack the shits. They were like, well, if we know that's the election, what's the point of doing anything now? I mean, and that was not thought through. Because how would you know that when everybody's saying to you...
Because elections, when you go into an election, everything's kind of on hold, right? So is that what you're talking about?
That's right.
So we
So no
inadvertently
decisions were
created
being
almost
made.
this
It was
caretaker.
paralysis. Yeah, right.
And the other thing with that, and it's politicians, when they come and they say, people come up to me and say, and it's like, stop. It's the people not coming up to you that make the difference in an election. So so in a sense, by listening to the people coming up to her, that was kind of the mistake.
Yeah, because there was a lot of media commentary around that time saying the same thing, right? Saying, they've got to stop this internal blah, blah, blah. I know, in fairness, we weren't doing ourselves any favours, but that's why it was an attempt to actually listen to people. And so again, that's always for a leader, that's a difficult judgment to make.
We're going to open up questions to the floor. So if you've got any questions, I'm sure I've missed a few things, but let's get back to those because you're in crisis management too. Most of the time. Give us your worst story from the campaign where you thought things were falling apart. Eamonn, you want to tell that story where I was there. It was a most horrific day of political campaigning in existence.
So you go on the road during the course of the campaign, right, and you have journalists with you. And so I was the senior press sec, so I'm travelling with them. And so we always had our own plane and that sort of thing. And sometimes Cameron would come on and off and whatever. But on this occasion, talk about just making it up. Well, we had a rough plan. That was to leave Brisbane at 4 a.m. So we had to get everyone out of bed at 3, get them down to the airport, get them all on a plane at 4 a.m. People are grumpy. And then where did we went from there? We went to Townsville.
Townsville.
Yep. And then that was to
And
do
then
one
Kevin
thing.
in Townsville decided that he wanted to go back to Brisbane at 10 a.m. because the Ekka was on and he needed to do a walk through the
That's
Ekka.
right.
Then we had to be in Darwin by
There was a
1
commemoration.
o'clock
Yeah. There was a
for
commemoration.
an announcement about the Northern Australia tax plan.
Well, it was actually the commemoration of like the
Oh,
battle or
that's
something,
right.
right? But in the middle of it, and this is what happens because you are under pressure. So he announced a tax concession plan for investors in the Northern Territory.
So did you come up with that on the plane, on the way there?
I don't know who came up with that,
Right,
but
okay.
anyway.
Trying to figure out how Kevin's brain
And
works.
then he went to the River Ord.
Yeah, so we went to Kununurra, right? This is all on one day. Remember that. This is on one day.
One day.
And the day's not over yet, right? It's
Yeah.
still going.
And we're just moving through time zones, so the day's just getting longer.
This is like a never-ending day. And we're on this plane getting drunker and drunker. So, like, Laura's sitting right behind me.
Speak for
and
yourself,
her, like,
Eamonn.
party. No, we were smashed by the end. Because you had to. And then we land in Perth, right? Then we get this. So this day ends, we get to that hotel at, midnight Perth time or something?
Yep.
It was a long day. And then I was the press sec, only to see the front pages where we're getting slammed in WA for only announcing an investment tax concession story for the Northern Territory and nothing for WA. That was a long day, that was. Yeah, I don't think my day ended.
Yeah, that was a long day. Yaron?
Oh,
Any
no.
horror stories?
No, not really.
Oh, come on.
No, I run a good campaign. So,
Tell us when, Morrison was his most cranky. What really annoyed him? When did he yell at you?
never. No, it's actually, I've been lucky, whether it's Perrottet or Morrison, pretty even killed people. But they do have their quirks. And I remember a similar story for the crazy last day of a campaign travel thing. We'd gone through Brisbane, Central Queensland, then Cairns, Townsville, I've forgotten the map. And then we're going down at the end of the day down to Gilmore, which is around Nowra. And that is about 6 o'clock at night the day before the election, and you're done. And then you get back on the plane after another event. And he says, remember, this is the night before the actual polling day. Everyone's expecting to go home, see their families for the first time in 5 weeks. He says, I think we should go to Tassie. And pilot says, where? And we fly down to Tassie and we spend the night and the morning on some Tasmanian booths. And this is 2019. And we won and he always had this thing in his head, right, that's what did it. So they have these quirks and they think, every moment counts, which is really interesting for observers. The good politicians who mean well by this country, they are truly committed. When they want to do everything, they do everything. And that was a case of doing everything right to the last minute. So not a horror story, but an observation.
Insight. Dee?
The whole 2013 campaign, I worked on it, and by the end of it, I didn't want to vote for Kevin either.
You can say that. You can say that. I got to say, the thing that got me ready for that campaign was...
Alcohol.
Well, always. 2009, a certain, I don't know, I can't remember who it was, but in 2009, someone who was going to be Premier of Queensland did 30 seats in 30 hours. Was that what it was? 30 seats in 30.
There as well.
There you go. Yeah, that was a long week. I tell you.
Yeah, that was a lot.
Any questions from the audience?
Yaron, you forgot about the time the Prime Minister crash-tackled a teenage boy.
Yes, a lot of
which
therapy.
is probably not a good look during an election campaign. Reflecting on the comment you made earlier about the way that corporates should engage with the community, it'd be interesting in your reflections on The Voice and the takeaway from being involved in political campaigns or campaigns that can be framed politically. Just interesting in your reflections on that.
Good question. Dee?
I think it was a campaign that spoke only to people inside the bubble. And I don't really want to bag, a lot of people worked really hard on it and whatever. I think it's absolutely perfectly okay for corporate Australia to back social campaigns, but to do that, you are putting yourself at risk, because people say, if you stuff up your own core business, they will say, why are you doing that when you should be doing this? Even though the two things aren't really linked and there's different people doing it, it doesn't matter. So there is a heightened risk in doing it, but you all need a social licence to operate. So I wouldn't get scared off doing good things.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And that's, in fact, after my political experience, my business is entirely about that, helping companies understand that if you want to be a good corporate citizen, you can be that, but work out how and where. And since The Voice, things have been very busy because people are asking themselves, well, how do I do that? And it's ultimately about authenticity, which I think is also Dee's point, the first one we made, which is that it's okay to do good, but do something that's roughly aligned with what they already know you for and like you for. Don't sort of stretch yourself. You can, feel free, and it's probably a nice conversation for the C-suite at dinner parties that, you do that, etc. But people aren't giving you much credit for it anyway. When you do something that's aligned with what they think you're good at and you make the world a better place, that's the sweet spot. So finding that authentic way to make a difference, which probably also means you don't have to do 100 things. Just find those 3 or 4 things perhaps, do them really well, have impact, and it sells itself.
Eamonn?
I think The Voice was, there was a lot of people involved for all the right reasons. It meant an awful lot to many, many Indigenous Australians, and we cannot forget that. I think it was less of a reflection of corporate Australia's contribution and more just a broader reflection on where we are as a country, and we're not quite there yet. Right? The fact we're still fighting over these things is,
What about the messaging, though? Not from corporate Australia, but just the government messaging.
Well,
They get
we-
wrong?
It was tricky because you were trying to say it wasn't going to make any difference, and it was going to make a difference.
Fundamentally.
So that was there was a fundamental problem there.
And which is the point I'm making. We are not sure-footed still
Yeah.
about our industry. So, you know.
Any other questions? Any final reflections?
What a
Advice?
wonderful audience this has been. That's what I'd like to say.
Enlightening.
Okay.
Did you want to hear our thoughts on AI, though?
Sure.
It's all right. No, it's the last
that's where you
session.
wanna
You
go,
deserved an
Yaron.
end. It's okay.
Off we go.
I feel like this is dangerous, and imagine they had wine in their hands. Please take this panel. Thank you. That was awesome.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Yaron. Thank you, Eamonn. And thank you, Dee Madigan. What a wonderful way to finish our conversation.